Thank you. Good evening, all. I know it takes a pleasure in bringing up an offbeat program from the Society of Auditors. Every time we plan that at least once in a month, these kind of pandemic times or relief times, we should have one offbeat program. So especially when you have an offbeat program, we had a few successful offbeat programs in the last few months. This program is completely unique in the sense, one, it has been rendered by the chartered accountant who is willing to come up and tell us about the auditing insights from the Mahabharata, and it's been associated with our president, Mr. P.S. Prabhakar sir, also. So we are looking forward for a good offbeat programs every month as an objective of the Society of Auditors. We would like to have one program at least every month to be conducted on this. So as an initiative. So coming back to the subject, I would like to first talk about the subject because that's little difficult than the speakers, because the speakers are well known to everybody, than the subject part of it. Because as far as Mahabharata is concerned, what I understand is whatever is not contained in this is not found to be anywhere. That means combining it with auditing, looks kind of the responsibility as an auditor we have to take in understanding the insights. When we do that particular auditing for any other entity, whatever it may be, especially in these kind of times. So it's nice to understand about Mahabharata as well as how it is being linked to auditing. I think we'll have a good, very interesting session. Coming back to the speaker, if I have to introduce Sri Priya, should I introduce her as a chartered accountant? Should I introduce her a former Central Council member? Or a person who has been doing a lot of other activities? As a matter of fact, I understand that she's been doing a lot of COVID-related help in the last few months. Done an excellent exercise of taking care of the chartered accountant members who have lost their a lot of family members, and they have been quite close enough in taking care of these kind of COVID times, is what CS Sripriya Kumar has been doing. She's a chartered accountant, everybody knows, and she's a partner in the SPR and company, and moreover she's also a life member of the Society of Auditors. So which of course, if she cannot be an avid reader of Mahabharata, she cannot deliver this interesting topic for us. And we have P.S. Prabhakar sir, who's our president, and of course well known to all of us in terms of these kind of subjects. It will be quite interesting for all of us to do. Instead of me wasting more time on this, I would leave the floor open to Prabhakar sir and Sri Priya madam to take it forward.
Thank you, Rajagopal. Thank you very much. As Rajagopal was mentioning, this subject is a very unique one. And all of us are aware about the great epic Mahabharata. Actually, two epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata from India. And Ramayana, that belongs to what is called Treta Yuga, and Mahabharata, which belongs to the Dwapara Yuga. But when we are talking about Yuga, it looks very distant. But Mahabharata, the happenings of Mahabharata probably have happened about 5,000 years back, just about 5,000 years back. And as Rajagopal was mentioning very rightly, what is not in Mahabharata is not anywhere else. And why it is not possible to link Mahabharata with anything, any abstract subject, includes auditing, is not a great wonder. If you look at the Mahabharata itself, 18 sections called Parvams, Adi Parvam, Vana Parvam, Bhishma Parvam, Shanti Parvam, etc. And 98 parts, 2,382 chapters, and a total of 96,635 verses. But please do not think that this is all what Sage Vyasa was supposed to have composed. Sage Vyasa is believed to have originally composed more than 6 million verses, out of which what we have today is about 96,635. Now, how are we going to talk about the insights from the Mahabharata? Sripriya madam has spoken about this to me for a long time back, and we did a joint program a few years back on almost on the same subject, but not as exhaustive as probably today's would be. And to tell you very briefly, one of the most important part of Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita, which is in the Bhishma Parva, where in 700 verses, there's a conversation between Lord Krishna and Arjuna, out of which about 85.5% of the verses have been spoken by Lord Krishna himself. He tells Arjuna that Atman of anything is uncreatable and indestructible. However, in different timelines, it may adopt new forms. For example, the auditing standards became auditing and assurance standards, and now they have become standards on auditing. So somehow the standards are surviving, and so let's hope that the profession also would survive in some form or the other. Now, Sripriya madam will be probably talking specific incidents. She is a very good storyteller. I've heard her telling small stories in many of the programs. She is going to be talking about certain attributes of auditor with insights from the Mahabharata. And she will also talk about certain situations where reinforcement of actions are there. So let's talk about the attributes. Sripriya.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, you are here. Okay. Now let's start with the attributes portion of it. What would you like to talk as a first attribute? Independence?
Sure. So here's a very, very hearty good evening to all of you, and I'm very, very touched that Prabhakar sir agreed to join me on this program. Honestly, I can see towering personalities in the audience today. We have Srivatsan sir, we have Karthik Bhatt, and at the outset, I must thank Rajagopalan sir for the meticulous kind of coordination for this event. I learned a lot from him, the way he took this whole thing. The mails and the follow-ups was amazing, and thanks to Ramaswamy sir, who's been incessantly sort of been at the organizing of programs for SOA. And I really know how difficult it is to run a unit which does not have CPE. So, but we don't have to talk about CPE today. So at the outset, as Prabhakar sir had mentioned, and I would like to completely invite Mr. Prabhakar for all his comments at the end of the stories. So what I've done today is try to just stitch together a bit of stories from the Mahabharata on certain aspects of auditing. So I've basically structured it into three parts. First is we'll talk a little bit about Mahabharata auditing and how the two get married. Then we'll talk about attributes of an auditor, and then we'll talk about situations and stories that match up to situations. Now, in this whole context, I realized something very, very simple. If the same topic had been management insights from the Mahabharata, it would have been very, very easy to cull stories. But I've tried my best to sort of relate situations and attributes to the whole thing. So let's start from the Mahabharata. Very simple, as Rajgopalan sir very appropriately mentioned. There's a Sanskrit phrase that says, translates to English.
Right, please, Jana.
Hello?
No, I'm just asking Jana to go to the next slides. Yeah, okay, please go ahead.
Whatever is here may be found elsewhere, and what is not in the Mahabharata cannot be found anywhere else. So it's an all-encompassing epic. All of us know it. The story of two warring cousins, stories of right, wrong, pride, humility, anger, stoicism, loyalty, deceit, jealousy, knowledge, ignorance, love, hate, faith, confidence, means, ends, war, peace, and most importantly, it's a story of miracles. And that's what each of us experience today in our everyday lives with COVID. So very simply, it's a struggle between two groups of cousins. There's one main story, which is the story of the war itself. But there are also other stories which are considered to be major stories. along with the main story, and that would be the stories of Satyavan, Savitri, Nala, Damayanti. There's also a version of the Ramayana itself which finds its place in the Mahabharata. It's one of the two itihasas of this great land where we're privileged to be born, the Bharat. And as again Prabhakar sir mentioned, I think it's the world's longest poem, beats even the Iliad by Homer. It's about 100,000 of verses, couplets, so it's 200,000 lines in all. There are 3 versions of the Mahabharata that are spoken about. One is the most famous one that we all know, which is where Vedavyasa recites it to the scribe who is Ganesha. And a very interesting thing about the Mahabharata is that it's made of framed tales or embedded narratives. So very often you find a story in a story in a story, and it just goes like the Russian babushka dolls. So the stories are endless, and for me it's been an amazing personal journey. I've been reading this Mahabharata for a while now, and I was very inspired by a book called The Difficulty of Being Good by Gurcharan Das. And so here I am. And very interesting thing about the Mahabharata is everything in the Mahabharata sort of adds to 9. So there are 18 books or the parvas, which adds to 9. There are it's 18 days of the battle. Your Bhagavad Gita has 18 chapters, and later on you will find that even the battle formations, everything adds to a certain mystical number 9. Now, what's the context of auditing? I think we are a profession at crossroads today. And I very, very strongly believe that in addition to the first principles of audit that we need to go back to, with all this technology catching up, we've sort of perhaps lost our view on what exactly this audit is all about. I think it's a huge profession at crossroads today. And I think understanding and appreciating the ethics in the context of what we do is perhaps more relevant today than ever. So these are very little stories that I have often found comfort in, and I've tried to apply it to situations. Whenever I feel bad, whenever I feel good, I think of some of these stories. And one thing that's very distinct about our profession, and perhaps the only other profession, which is the medical profession, is that your Swadharma and your Sanatana Dharma are pretty much the same. You as an auditor is expected to be right and the same Sanatana Dharma. So you are expected to be at the cutting edge of trust and integrity, and the underlying premise, of course, is Dharma. So with this very short preamble on how I would connect, I also want to talk about 2 other things before we sort of dive into the stories. One is actually how does the Mahabharata and audit actually connect? It connects even before you talk about an auditor or situations in audit that we're going to talk about today. One is a very physical and a very simplistic sort of connection. If you notice, the ICAI is headquartered at Indraprastha. And Indraprastha was actually the capital of the Kurus. And one of the 5 villages that Krishna asked Duryodhana to give to the Pandavas. He said, you just give them 5 villages. The villages all go as Tilprastha, Swarnaprastha, Indraprastha, etc. To which Duryodhana is supposed to have retorted and said, forget a village. I am not even going to give you as much space as there is in the head of the needle. And that's when the battle lines get drawn and we launch into the Mahabharata war. So that's a very physical connection of the institute being there. I'd like to go to the next level, which is slightly more metaphysical before we get to the sublime. Now, what's our emblem? Our emblem is the Garuda. And it reads Yayeshu Sukteshu Jagriti, credited to Sri Aurobindo, who identified this as the most appropriate aspect that should reign on the emblem of the ICAI. Again, here there's a very strong context to the Mahabharata itself, because in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, among the Daityas, Lord Krishna says, I'm Prahlada. And Daityas are actually the demons. So among the demons, I'm Prahlada. Amongst the animals, I am a fearless lion. Amongst subduers, I am time. And it's such a classic statement. Everything gets boiled in time. And he says, amongst birds, I am Garuda, the son of Vinata. So with these 2 very simple sort of connections that I thought I should bring on on board before we start. And of course, the underlying principle of the Mahabharata was dharma and reinforcement of dharma. And the underlying basis of the entire auditing profession is again dharma, both in its swadharmic and the Sanatana dharmic sense. So now I'll go to PSP sir's question, independence. So Prabhakar sir, right, you wanted to speak about independence first?
No, you speak first.
Yeah, okay. So independence, what's the story that I can think of about independence? Now, most of us think Krishna was this very happy god playing the flute, a master strategist, and a mentor. There was much more to Krishna. Krishna had a huge army at his command. It was called the Narayani Sena, a very inconquerable kind of formation that he had. He's supposed to have had about 10 million warriors, but of which only a part, a 2 lakh part was lent as an akshauni or a formation to the war itself. Now, the most overwhelming idea of independence is what one sees in Lord Krishna. He was very clear. They were both related to him. So he says, look, one can have me and one can have my armies. And then he goes on to say, the side which has me, whether it's the Pandavas or the Kauravas, will have a non-fighting me. So he stays absolutely independent of the situation. And the entire Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita especially focuses on independence. You know, what I would translate to call as Nishphala Karma, or to do your duty very independent. Most of us, and here there's a very strong connection where you must be independent of your client, whether it's good, bad, whether he's failing or whether he's successful. You're supposed to be independent, and you have those ease-bar threats that you're supposed to, sort of watch out for, which is your self-review, your advocacy, your intimidation threats, etc. And with this, I'd like to close my story on how independence is very, very enshrined in both the auditing profession as well as the Mahabharata. Over to you, PSP sir.
Thank you, Priya. See, the whole scheme of today, we are going to be having only the main batsman is going to be only Sri Priya, and I'm going to be only a just runner. But maybe I'll take a couple of singles here and there, only to ensure that the crease is given back to Sri Priya. So that is the way in which we would like to go. But in the question of independence, as she very, very rightly pointed out, no, independence is one of the most important traits that an auditor must have, because auditors are perhaps the only professionals who will probably get paid by the client whose mistakes we are supposed to point out. And we are, whether right or wrong, we will have to tell the truth up front. And this was, very vividly explained in the Mahabharata by Vidura's character. Vidura was a person who is actually the cousin of Dhritarashtra, and he is believed to be the embodiment of dharmic values. But he was with Duryodhana. He was in the royal court of Duryodhana, but all the time he was chiding and criticizing Duryodhana whenever he went out of tune, to the extent that he would even irritate Duryodhana to such an extent. And in a situation where something went beyond control, Duryodhana chides him in the open court. As per Panchali Sabadam of Bharatiya, he is, without even giving respect to the age of Vidura and the relationship, he says, Nandriketta Vidura, Shatrum Nanamatra Vidura, Tindra Uppinike Nasam Tedihindra Vidura, Ivarikku Nenjum, Aranmanaikku Vayurum. Very fantastic wording it is. Ivarikku Nenjum. You keep your heart for the 5 people, and whereas you are getting paid from me. But this is how a real independent person has to be there, whether he gets paid by that person or this person. He has to be independent in his thoughts and deeds. And when she was talking about independence as an attribute of an auditor, I was just thinking that probably I should bring Vidura's story here. The next one probably is what? Objectivity.
Yes, sir. This is one of my most loved segments and stories. So the Mahabharata starts with the Adi Parva, and then goes on to the Sabha Parva, and then comes to the Vana Parva. So this is the story of Yaksha Prashna, which is the epitome of objectivity of an individual. So the Pandavas had gone into a 12-year exile, and then they were supposed to be incognito for 1 year. Now, somewhere towards the end of this exile, a Brahman comes to Yudhishthira and he says, a deer came, and with its antlers, it has taken away my wooden blocks with which I can make fire. So he says, if I can't make fire, I can't, do my rituals. So please help me find those wooden blocks. And off go the Pandavas trying to find those wooden blocks, and they're following the antlers' footsteps. Sorry, the deer's footsteps. And Yudhishthira is very tired and he wants some water. So he says, Nakula, can you go find me some water? So Nakula goes to a lake. Now, when he reaches the lake and he's about to drink the water, there's a voice, without a body, of course, a yaksha, who says, please answer my questions, else you will drop dead if you drink this water before answering the questions. So Nakula is wondering, what is this? And then doesn't obey any instruction, goes and drinks the water and falls dead. The 3 other brothers also go in search of Nakula, wondering where he's got. They encounter a very similar circumstance. And then they also fall dead. They don't heed to the yaksha. And then Yudhishthira goes, and then he goes near the lake and then finds 4 of his brothers dead. So he's wondering what to do. And before he's going to go find his brothers' killers, he proceeds to drink the water himself. And then the same yaksha, who's called Baka, a crane, says, stop and answer my questions. And the crane asks him 125 questions. And if any of you want to Google this, I think it's perhaps the best part of the Mahabharata in my view. And the answers that Yudhishthira gives are embedded with such sophistication that it's unimaginable. And even in English, it reads extremely nice. So, in fact, one of my most favorite questions in that is, he asks, what is the biggest wonder in this world? To which Yudhishthira responds by saying, look, all of us know we are going to die, but we still carry on as if, we're all immortal for the next day, and we continue to do our duties. So at the end of it all, the Baka, the crane, is so pleased that he says, okay, I will give you a boon. And you can resurrect one of your brothers. They're in a very, very rare show of objectivity, which again could have come only from Yudhishthira, because he was born of Dharma himself. He says, okay, give me Madri's son, Nakula or Sahadeva. So the crane asks him why. And look at Yudhishthira himself. It would have made far more sense for him to revive Arjuna, given that there's going to be an impending war. So he says, no, each mother must have a son. My mother has a son, Kunti has a son, and so must Madri. Madri must have a son, so you please revive him. And so the Baka is so pleased, and later on the Baka himself mutates to his original form and presents himself as Dharma and says, I'm so pleased with you, you can have all your brothers back. And this, I think, is an outstanding illustration of objectivity. We could move on to the next one, sir.
Yaksha Prashna is undoubtedly one of the best part of Mahabharata. The way in which the questions are asked, the way in which the alacrity with which Yudhishthira answers. But only one thing is, I just wanted to add a small incident here. Even in the Vanaparva itself, even before the Yaksha Prashna episode, auditors are good in asking questions, and the question answer session is normally welcomed in every conference. Here, even before the Yaksha Prashna actually happens, there is another question answer session, where again Yudhishthira was in the answering. He had to be the person who had to answer, because the very similar incident, Bhima goes actually in search of something, and he is actually captured by a python. The python is none other than one of the ancestors of the Kuru dynasty called Nagusha, who had been given a curse by sage Agastya to become a python. This python captures Bhima, and Bhima tries his best to free himself from the python, which he could not do, and he gets so tired. And when Yudhishthira comes in search of Bhima, he finds the Bhima in the clutches of Python, and he requests Python to relieve him. To which Python says, "You answer my questions. I am under a curse, and I have been told that there will be one person, one Dharmatma, who will come and answer your questions. At that point of time only, you will become a normal human being, and at that point of time, I will also relieve your brother." And he is asking questions. Some of the questions were, what should be learned? Who is a Brahman? What can elevate a person? This question is very important. He's asking what can elevate a person. See, as Priya was mentioning, uh, Yudhishthira is an embodiment of knowledge, and he doesn't think even for 2 seconds to give you an answer. His answers are all very crisp, to the point, and almost immediate. This he says, charity, truth, non-violence, and pleasant words are the 4 important things that can elevate a person. And again, the Python asks, please tell me which is the best among the 4. Which, like a typical auditor, Yudhishthira says, it depends on circumstances. Which is correct, in the sense, truth may be the best in certain circumstance, whereas charity may be in a best quality under another circumstance. So this, again, objective to the core, Yudhishthira's objectivity was without doubt. Both happens in Vanaparva, both question answer session, but of course, Yaksha Prashna is much more detailed and much more interesting. The next one is, the slide says confidentiality. How do you relate confidentiality to Mahabharata?
Yeah, so the whole, this is the story of Kunti, which I'm sure all of us have heard. When Kunti was very, very young, she served a very difficult sage called Durvasa, very famous for doling out curses. He's very happy with her service, and he says, I'll give you a boon. You can have a child immaculately of anybody. So in her very young age and immaturity, she invokes sun god. He says you can call any of the gods. And she has a child called Karna. So this is something that she keeps confidential for life. There are only actually 2 people who know about it. One is Kunti, and other is Krishna by his virtue of his divinity. But that's not the story that I want to. So this confidentiality part, I'm sure all of us know. And she held this as a secret till the very end. But what's very interesting is how Karna actually plays out for the situation in a display of very, very rare loyalty. So Krishna apparently goes to Karna sometime before the start of the war and reveals to him the story of his birth. And he says, hey Karna, look at it very, very logically. You are the first son of the Pandavas. You're even senior to Yudhishthira. So you please just say yes, and you can become the king and take over all of this. To which Karna says, no, I was born a charioteer's son. I owe my allegiance and my loyalty to my foster parents, and that's where I'll stay. But this is a small story on confidentiality.
Priya, I would like to supplement this story with another incident which I have learned, which I have read somewhere long time back. Again, on the same episode of Kunti and Karna, there is actually a saying in Tamil, which normally is probably very true during pandemic times, saying "Arilum savu, Nurilum savu," which means a person can meet his end whether he is 6 or 100. Aru, Nuru, because because of the alliteration, this is mentioned. That is what people have been thinking. But actually, this goes back to the same Karna story. When Kunti comes to Karna and requests him not to fight against his own brothers, Karna is believed to have said, Mother, I am going to die anyway in this war. My end is written, whether I am a part of the 6 or part of 100. See, again, very interestingly, he has added himself 5 plus 1 as 6, but he never added himself as 100 plus 1 as 101. So he said, whether I am a part of 6 or I am a part of 100, my death is certain. I mean, that is the statement which Karna is believed to have said, which is probably misinterpreted as if the death can come to anybody. I just thought I will mention this because you mentioned Karna and Kunti. We'll go to the next one.
That was an outstanding metaphor.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So the next we want to talk about is competence. So it's a very nice thing about the Mahabharata is both the sides, of course, there is a line that gets repeated in the Mahabharata apparently 14 times. It says, Yatho Krishna, Tato Dharma, Yatho Dharmos, Tato Jayaha, which means wherever there's Krishna, it's going to be the victorious side. But nevertheless, the teams were never short of preparation. It was a massive war that was fought with about 39 lakh soldiers. So those formations were called as Akshaunis. And these Akshaunis, 11 Akshaunis, and each Akshauni was something like 2,18,500. Again, it would add to 9. And there were 11 Akshaunis which fought on the Kaurava side, including one brought in by Karna, who was the king of Anga, and all their allies, and 7 Akshaunis. And of the 11 Akshaunis, one you must remember was also the Narayan Sena, which belonged to Krishna. And there were 7 Akshaunis, which were part of the, I think somebody's in the waiting room. The 7 Akshaunis, which were part of the Pandavas. So again, it adds to 18 as a formation. And what's very interesting is, apparently the fundamental unit of measurement was 10. Chariot, an elephant, 3 horses and 5 soldiers. And that was a 10. And that was called as a patti. And 3 pattis would make a Sena Mukha, and 3 Sena Mukhas would make a Gulma, which would make a Gana, a Vahini, a Prithana, and so on, and come to something called as an Akshauni of 218700. So auditing is all about competence. Now you need to know your standards on auditing. You need to know your accounting standards. You need to know everything. But here, in terms of a very small digression, given that we're talking so much on the Mahabharata and so little on auditing, I think today we need to scale up our competence to a different level. See, you don't audit for yourself. You audit for a stakeholder. As a profession, what we were destined to be 70 years back and what was scripted for us is very different from a stakeholder's perception today. And you see it written all over the new Schedule 3, the new Caro. There's a dramatic change from financial reporting. Your accounts, financial statements are looking more like management accounting today, management accounting statements. Look at the incoming Schedule 3. It talks about CWIP. It talks about aging of CWIP. It talks about time overruns. It talks about cost overruns. It talks about ratios. It talks about how your numerators are defined, denominators are defined. So the underlying theme, whether it's auditing or whether it's life, I think it's competence. And today, I think it's a grand welcome to this new auditing profession, where knowledge is not just power, but life itself. It can pretty much determine whether you survive or you don't. So this is a short brief on how the teams organize themselves very competently. And similarly, the battles would be matched. If X was fighting one day, Y would, from the other side, would be pitted against him. And it was a battle that was fought, obviously, both fairly and unfairly, but with an underlying theme of very, very competent people.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you, Priya. We'll go to the next one. Professional skepticism.
I'd like to start here with 1 minute. I just need to press. Yeah. So I'd like to actually start from the reverse here. I'll go from the auditing to the Mahabharata. This is actually a true story. It was a story of a very large listed company which collapsed. The auditors were impeccable in terms of integrity and conduct, and it was a very simple issue of long-term funds, not a simple, fairly complex issue of long-term funds used for short-term purposes. And this gentleman whom I happen to know, who's no more, actually said, but Priya, we just trusted them. That's when I realized the value of professional skepticism. That's a very nice story. So Duryodhana goes to Krishna and says, why is everybody, what's a good man, bad man? So Duryodhana says, why is everybody calling Yudhishthira as good? And why am I bad? So Yudhishthira summons both these hulks, and says, okay, come. So he asks Duryodhana, show me one good man. Duryodhana says, impossible, Krishna. Are you joking? Nobody is good. He goes to Yudhishthira and says, show me one bad man. And Yudhishthira says, none. Everybody is good. Everybody is nice. Both these people lacked skepticism or the ability to be skeptical. Although I would credit Duryodhana with a little more skepticism. This is the same thing of us as auditors. We say, oh, if Ashok was doing fixed assets, Ashok is a nice man, so he must be doing well. If this CFO was good, then he must be good. The financial statements must be good. So today, the underlying theme across the entire auditing profession is skepticism. The ability to be skeptical, the ability to trust, but verify in enormous measure. And every time in most of my speeches, I make inference to this particular story from the Mahabharata, because I think we all see others as we see ourselves or the way we are. So this is on professional skepticism.
Thank you, Priya. See, in fact, from what you have mentioned, I also have had an experience when I was abroad, when a gentleman, a particular gentleman who was a CFO of a company, a client company, and his boss was very happy with him, and he said, this man has never taken, vacation. For the past 5 years, he has never gone on vacation, and now he has been so trustworthy, so diligent, and so what's called, he is an extremely competent person. He used to mention, but this, it so happened that the auditors came up with something, is that if the person has not gone on leave for 5-6 years as an expatriate, there must be something wrong. He must be trying to protect something which is not good, and something, if he goes on leave, somebody will find out. Criticism was lacking in the boss, which led to an invention of a massive fraud. So actually, Sujata used to, say in one of his novels, mistrust the obvious. It was probably from the standpoint of a crime investigation. He said, mistrust the obvious. If something is so obvious, don't trust it. And another thing which I always used to tell my students, because they are all supposed to look for evidences always, because whether everything is right or not, you have to have evidence to back up your work. So, but the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So this is what I used to say, both probably, in relation to the professional skepticism. We will go to the next one. And I think you have completed with the attributes portion of it. Let us go to the situations. What are all the situations that you have found in Mahabharata that reinforce actions?
Yes, sir. Before that, I'd just like to touch upon the last part a little bit. So professional skepticism, how does it translate to today's landscape? See, you've got 5 lakh companies or so which MCA has struck off. You've got companies which we audit where there is just one large loan from a bank deployed in another entity as a loan or an advance or an investment. Why would a legal entity sit in the middle just to be a conduit for funds? So these are the kind of thoughts that the new Caro and the new Schedule 3 wanting a lot more disclosures attempts to actually make us professionally skeptical. Yeah, so I have thought through a few situations. You can move on to the next slide, please. So the first situation we're talking about is qualifications and audit statements. See, a lot of times we also want to be slightly nice to the client. We don't really come up with exactly what we want to say because we're saying, okay, why, anyway, I'm pointing out a problem. So for example, you write, the company has been generally regular in depositing their PF dues. What does that mean? Out of 12 months, if you've not done it for 3 months, also it is a sign of distress. So somewhere along the line, maybe even maybe we're just being polite, nice, we're being kind, a very overrated virtue. And in a lot of the collapses I see, there have been very, very negligible or no. I think in terms of integrity, we're pretty high. But in terms of being very soft-hearted, we're not yet there. So one example that I can think of was the qualifications and audit statements. So when you make a qualification that's neither here nor there, it doesn't really get you home and it doesn't benefit the stakeholder. And it's very similar to the half-truth story of Ashwatthama. So as we all know, Drona was the guru of both the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and he was particularly fond of two people. One was Arjuna, and the other was his own son, Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama himself had a big boon. He could not be killed by anybody less than a human. So he was pretty much, and by himself, he was a huge warrior in his own right with a kingdom to his credit. And Drona, of course, was the master marksman. He was there everywhere. But Drona himself, despite all his capability, did not stand for what was right. There was always the silence of the good, which was associated with Drona and with Bhishma, and which is also a carry-on on the audit. I mean, as an auditor, you're not expected to be silent, because Martin Luther King said, it's more often that the silence of the good that does more harm than the bad of the bad itself, or thereabouts. So incidentally, it was Drona who, on the 13th day of the battle, made the Chakra Vyuh to decimate Yudhishthira, in where a very unexpected demise happened of the very, very young lad Abhimanyu. So the Pandavas have broadly understood that it's not possible to, win the war without decimating the key team, the Dronas and the Bhishmas. So they set about a strategy to, defeat Drona. So this is again played out per Krishna's script. He calls an elephant. There is an elephant that's called Ashwatthama. The elephant gets killed. And we must remember that Drona was extremely fond of his son. So somebody tells Drona, Ashwatthama is dead. So Drona wants to confirm it. So he calls the best man he can think of. He calls Yudhishthira. And he says, tell me what happened. Yudhishthira, of course, can never lie. So Yudhishthira says, Ashwatthama, the elephant, is dead. And at that time, Krishna does something. He gets the entire set of people to blow the conch. So what Drona hears is only Ashwatthama is dead. And thereafter, he just puts his bows down and sits to meditate, and he gets killed. Now, this is only the half the story. Now, is this half-truth good? It's not good. Because there was a huge fallout that happened out of Drona's demise. An unfair war, an unfair end, but then means justified ends in the Mahabharata. Everywhere, that's the end of the story. If your ends are good, your means are justified. So Ashwatthama actually goes on a rampage. He kills the entire Pandava clan's children, and he's about to fire the salvo on the last arrow on Uttara, who's Abhimanyu's wife. Abhimanyu is dead. His womb, and that womb is protected by Krishna. So, and that child grows up to be Parikshit. So, what is important here is that half-truth might get you halfway, but it results in a wrong end, which is what one sees in all these companies which have gone into insolvency, etc., etc. Somewhere along the line, could we have been tighter as a profession? Will always plague our minds in the past. But I think we're part of a much larger ecosystem. In my opinion, the pecking order of auditors should be last and not the first. Today, if something goes wrong, somebody looks up and says, oh, what was the auditor doing? But actually, I think it's the directors, it's the bankers, it's the credit rating agencies, it's the CFOs, it's the operating management, and then you can come and ask the auditor what happened. So this is on why qualifications in the audit statements need to be complete and not half or half-baked.
Interesting insight, Priya. But you have asked a question, is half-truth good? I mean, the whole auditing, ends up with the concept called true and fair. I think true and fair is something that you're going to be talking separate as a separate, attribute or separate subject. But in Subhasithani, there is another sloka called Subhasithani which says, Satyam bruyat, priyam bruyat, na bruyat satyam apriyam, priyam cha anritam bruyat isha dharma sanatana, which only means speak the truth, but speak it pleasantly. But do not speak unpleasant truths. But on no account, you should speak untruth to please someone. which probably is the essence of our audit reports drafting. We are not writing half truths. We are writing truths in a pleasant language, or probably the least unpleasant language, whether it is a qualification or an adverse opinion or anything. There, it is not actually a half truth. Probably it is not full truth, but a truth said a little more pleasantly, to the extent it is possible. I think we are following Shubhashitani more than Mahabharata here. We'll go to the next one. Audit approach.
Yeah. So again, I'll start with auditing here and then go to the Mahabharata. So typically, how do you audit? It's always top down. You don't go start an audit saying, okay, give me a voucher. You're expected to get your financial statements. So it's a very top down approach to audit. So in terms of, and this approach, whether it's a top down approach in terms of going from your financials down to your voucher that you want to audit. Today, if you want to discuss an audit, do you start with the CFO or do you start with the, accounts assistant? You always start with the CFO. You build a perspective and then you go. So that's actually the head first, actually. So I like one story in particular on how someone got the approach right. So this is in the same context of the earlier story. So where one gets the armies and one gets Krishna. So how did that story happen? So both Duryodhan and Yudhishthira want to enlist Krishna's support. They've more or less mentally made their minds. Again, there are multiple versions here, but I'll tell you a version that's, sounds a little dramatic. So they've decided, and then both these people go marching to see Krishna, and Krishna is actually asleep. So Duryodhan reaches first, and Duryodhan's wondering where to sit, and then he says, why should I sit at Krishna's feet? Let me go and sit near Krishna's head. And then Yudhishthira comes, and then Yudhishthira is, very respectful of Krishna, and he sits at his feet. So when Krishna opens his eyes, who does he see first? He sees Yudhishthira first. He says, hey, what do you want? And then Duryodhan also comes and says, look, we want your support. And then the whole thing plays out. But there is a small, and again, the one thing about the Mahabharata is that there are as many stories as there are people who are listening and saying. It's also a lot of, it's a very ballad style of rendering. And in some versions, it says, apparently Duryodhan says, I came first. But Krishna says, but I saw him first. But then they finally settle down. And anyway, luckily for us, Duryodhan is given the first option. He wants the armies, he takes the armies. And Yudhishthira gets Krishna. And since he has Krishna with him, he also has Jaya with him. And this is a story on audit approach, actually. So it's approaching any situation the right way. Who do I start with? How do I communicate? How do I start my work? How do I finish my work? So it's about an approach issue. And it's as true as of management as it is of auditing.
Thank you, Priya. I think we'll go to the next one now. I think this is going to be more important. Using the work of an expert, I think you will have myriad, instances of using the work of one expert who's Krishna in the whole scheme of Mahabharata. Mahabharata is itself, a very schemy story, and in which they have used the work of Krishna, the all-pervasive expert. But how are you going to bring the particular subject into Mahabharata?
So I'll tell you two stories. One is the story of Shakuni. So Shakuni was actually the brother of Gandhari. So there's a story on why Shakuni himself wants to destroy the Kauravas, and it's apparently a premeditated scheme to make this whole thing happen. Again, that's just one of the many renderings that I've read. So immediately after Dhritarashtra is married, he's very unhappy with the marriage because apparently Draupadi is destined, Gandhari is destined to lose her husband or something like that. So they perform a ritual before she gets married to him. So Dhritarashtra is fuming. He imprisons Shakuni, his father, and all his brothers, and feeds them each 1 grain of rice a day to kill them. and the whole family is very upset. So they aggregate all this rice and give it only to Shakuni. And Shakuni eats, and he's the only survivor. And he carries with him a magic dice. A dice which, again, in some renderings, is supposed to be made out of the bone of his parents and his brothers. And apparently, he will never lose. This, anyway, our Dhritarashtra doesn't know, because he's more angry than wise, and all his anger and pride mask his senses. So he always uses Shakuni to play the dice, and Yudhishthira also doesn't understand. So this was a case of the Kauravas using the expert help. But much, much later, after this entire Mahabharata is over, someone very close to Krishna says, Krishna, I have a doubt. Krishna says, okay, buddy, tell me, what is it? So he says, Krishna, you are so powerful. You knew Shakuni was on the other side. You could have offered to play the dice. Why didn't you play the dice? To which Krishna asks only one question in response. He says, hey, but they never asked me. He didn't even ask me to help. Now Draupadi asked me, so I said, okay, I'll help you when the disrobing happened. So these are two very contrasting stories of somebody who took the expert help and somebody who never asked for help. And it's very true in an audit as well. If you think you're in a domain which is unfamiliar to you, so let's say it's a highly tech intensive company and you need to get this ITGC validated before you do the statutory audit, I don't think we should feel shy to ask for expert help. So this is on using the work of an expert, someone who got it right and someone who did not.
Thank you, Priya. It's a very interesting insight. I think the next slide tells me code of conduct and ethics, auditing by the rules. I think this is perhaps one of the most important and the happening thing as far as auditing is concerned. All of us are always concerned about code of conduct and ethics and the disciplinary mechanism. And in the Mahabharata, you have several instances of breach of code of conduct and breach of ethics. And if you look at, you compare Ramayana and Mahabharata, Ramayana was much more ethical in various stages than Mahabharata. In Mahabharata, you have seen a lot of horrible things happening. Burning of the lacquer palace to kill the Pandavas, the dice game itself, the Shakuni playing on behalf of Duryodhana, brazen attempt to outrage the modesty of Draupadi, killing of Abhimanyu, Krishna strategizing to eliminate Bhishma, Drona, Jayadratha, Karna, all these things, so many things that have happened. And in the practices of warfare itself, there were a lot of unethical issues that used to happen in Mahabharata. In Ramayana, when Ravana was bereft of all his weapons, Rama was believed to have told him, please go, take rest tonight and come back tomorrow. But such things do not happen. Even in the night, as you very rightly pointed out, Ashwatthama killed all the infants, in the dead of night, after the war was over. So all these things have happened. So how are you going to relate the ethical part of it to the auditing?
Yeah. So audit is all about, ethical conduct. I think that's the substratum of this entire auditing profession itself. Now, if you look at the Mahabharata by itself, it was a story where dharma was reinstated. But at the end of the war, there were really no winners. The entire Pandava clan was destroyed. The entire Kaurava clan was destroyed. And I think the lesson in itself was that because the battle was not played by the rules, it ended up defeating. And here I'd like to make a very interesting sort of reference. So the entire age, the olden age was divided into periods of time, which were called as the yugas. And by yuga, you mean a yoke that connects periods of time. So you had the Satya Yuga, the Treta Yuga, the Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. And apparently it's said that there have been diminishing value systems over these periods, which is why the Ramayana was supposed to be a far more ethically fought battle between Rama and Ravana and PSP sir would be able to explain this better. Apparently in the Kambaramayana also, there's a reference, right? Indripoi Nalaiva. So he says the sun has gone down, so you can go and come tomorrow and we'll meet again. But Mahabharata was not such a war. So there were very, very clear rules of war. You can't kill children, you can't kill women, you can't fight after sunset, you can't, you can't fight somebody who's disarmed, you can't kill somebody disarmed. But all these rules, but for not fighting a woman or not harming a woman, I think was actually flouted. So if you notice here, it was an unarmed Drona who was decimated. He lays down his weapons and then off he goes. Similarly, Krishna masking the sun, with his discuss, just many stories. But the end of it that I'd like to say is that the Ramayana was actually a pretty happy ending, and they lived happily there ever after. Whereas this was not so, which is why it's very important to play any game by its rules. So that's about it.
As you rightly pointed out, Ramayana, the war of Ramayana was eulogized much better, even in literature, than the war of Mahabharata. Mahabharata war, even today, it's still, if there is going to be a nasty war, it's just a Mahabharata war. But sage poet Kalidasa mentioned Gaganam Gaganakaram Sagaram Sagaropamah. Rama Ravanayor Yuddham, Rama Ravanayor, which means he compared how can you compare Rama Ravana Yuddham with what you can compare? It means Gaganam Gaganakaram, the sky can be compared only with the sky. Sagaram Sagaropamaha, a sea can be compared only with the ocean. But similarly, the war between Rama and Ravana cannot be compared with anything else other than the war between Rama and Ravana. So actually, very rightly said that the Rama Ravana Yuddha in the Ramayana war was much more ethically fought than Mahabharata war. You are very right about it. We'll go to the next one.
And when you don't play by the rules, there is really no victor. So
mayhem. If there is a mayhem, the role of a mentor is a very important subject. And according to, considering the recent news items that have happened, I would like to I would like you to explain this in the context of the Mahabharata.
Yeah. So if there are two professions today where this concept of mentoring is very, very clear, one is the profession of chartered accountants, where we have articles assistants, and the other is the profession of lawyers, where the relationship between senior, junior, the training period, etc., are very, very well enshrined. I think the role of a mentor can't be overemphasized. And I think one of the reasons why we have stayed a very, very robust profession is because of this concept of article assistants. I don't think any other professional who comes out, whether it's an engineer who comes out of an engineering college, except of course for a doctor who does his house surgery, etc., no other professional comes out so complete and in a ready to hit the road state like our profession does. And hence there is also sometimes when I speak to myself on why I should do a thing per a practice, I keep telling this to my partners, look, you must make programs, you must make checklists, is because I think you also have some kind of an obligation to train an article assistant who's working for you. So the whole story of the Mahabharata, actually there was a virtual takeoff and a conclusion only because of the mentor, which was Lord Krishna. So if you were to sort of give designations to the Pandavas, your CEO was Yudhishthira, your COO was the very confused Arjun. He was brilliant. He was a phenomenally talented warrior, but always unable to decide. And it's the presence of Krishna. And then what happens is finally there is the entire battle is all drawn. The formations have happened. Krishna has even converted it a bad day into a good day, and that's another story. It'll take a bit longer, so I'm going to leave that part out. So they've all fixed everything, and it's so beautifully aligned, and we've come to the war, and the formations are facing each other. Arjun tells Krishna, please take me to the center of the battlefield. And there he goes, stands there, drops his weapons, and he says, no, Krishna, I can't fight my cousins. Impossible. What am I going to gain in this? I'm depressed. and disillusion. And again, for me personally, I know this is sort of thing. I've been through this many, many times, and I've had people like PSP bail me out of those situations. So I'm extremely well qualified to speak. But there was Krishna playing the role of a mentor, and he gives him a very sensible advice. He says, and that's where the Bhagavad Gita is played out. Again, in a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, which is why everything reads as Krishna Arjuna Samvade. So they're in a dialogue, a question and answer mode, where he asks questions about duties, about karma, about and then it all plays out, and finally it's that mentor who actually converts it. So I'm very clear that this audience would comprise of both mentors and mentees. So to the mentees like me, I would always be very respectful of the many mentors who have played a very important role in my life. And to all the mentors, that we have a very, very strong responsibility to our mentees. And I think that's the story of Krishna. It was the entire Bhagavad Gita was a crisis of self-identity. Who am I? What am I doing here? What should I do? Is this right? Is this wrong? And there Krishna says something very, very simple. He says, just do your duty. It's nishphala karma, which means you just do it because it's your duty and you have to do it, and don't expect any fruits out of this. And then you surrender everything to a bigger presence. In fact, I remember when I was doing my articles, one of my partners, whenever he was signing, he used to look back and sign. And there used to be a photograph of Venkatachalapati there. And then he would say, okay, I've done my work and then I'm signing now. So it's over to Prabhakar sir to add, and I'm sure he'll add phenomenally well.
To supplement Sripriya, as you very rightly pointed out about the Bhagavad Gita, actually I was mentioning about the 700 verses of Bhagavad Gita, during which Lord Krishna, gives sermons after sermons to a confused Arjuna. Because Arjuna says, I am confused. I don't know what to do. And at one point of time, he says, you please let me know what I should do. I am surrendering everything. I am surrendering myself to you. And then he goes on, talks about various yogas, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Sannyasa Yoga, Bhuti Yoga, everything he says. And finally, on the 18th chapter, he says, what is the role of a mentor? He perfectly places, Krishna plays it perfectly and says, now I have told you what all you need to be told. I have tried to clear the cobweb of your doubts. Now I want you to take the decision of what you need to do. Because he does not take the decision on behalf of Arjuna. He elevates his student, mentee, to the level, up to a particular level, to which at which he can make a decision for himself. And he says, Yatechasi tatha guru. And at that point of time, Arjuna says, I am cleared of all my doubts. Krishna, Karishye vachanam tava. I will do what you have asked me to do. So that is what it is. The mentor-mentee relationship is so important that even in our profession, we will need to elevate our students to such a level that they are able at the time, at the end of their articles period, at the time they finish their CA and go, they have to take a decision of for themselves. Again, another issue is another small story which I also thought that I would say was about on this mentoring issue. When Arjuna acts as a Brahmanali for 1 year, when he is in the Virat Raja's court as a dancer, he is by a curse he has to be having a third gender. He has to be in the role of a third gender at least for 1 year, according to a curse that he had already received, and he makes use of this particular curse when he stays in the Virat Maharaja's place for 1 year after they complete their exile for 13 years. And at that point of time, he becomes the teacher for Uttara, who is the daughter of King Virat. And at that point of time, Uttara actually she's very a doting student, a devoted student to Arjuna, and she learns everything from Arjuna. But at the end of the period, what happens is 1 year period, and the time comes for them to reveal themselves, and it is revealed that Brahmanala was none other than Arjuna, and King Virat was so pleased that he offers his daughter Uttara in marriage to Arjuna. Arjuna is normally a very flamboyant guy. He's a very he goes and gets married to everybody. Wherever he goes, he gets married. He's a very romantic guy. But Arjuna says, I will not accept this. I will not accept this. I know you have a very beautiful and pretty girl. I cannot accept this. I have been a teacher to her. And there is a speciality attached to this relationship. To a teacher, a student is always a son or a daughter, nothing more. So I cannot get married to Uttara, even if you offer to her. I will probably try to take her as my daughter-in-law, and that is how Abhimanyu gets married to Uttara. So this is one another story which I thought I would add to you. We'll probably go to the next one.
Yeah. So that's the king. He actually becomes a maid to Sudeshna, who's Uttara's mother. Yes, that's a very nice story. So then the next we come to is strategy. So all of the Mahabharata was a story of strategy and intuition, both on the winning side and on the losing side, and all of Krishna's role in the epic. So it's like this is like it's to state the obvious. But I thought I'll take three small stories just so that something that we know and something possibly we've not heard. So one is of course the disabling of Karna. Karna is born with his, with this, with a traditional armory that he was born with, the Kavacha and the Kundala, because he's born of the sun god himself. So people understand that unless it's removed, he can't be killed. So Krishna disguises himself as a poor Brahmin and then goes and takes it off him. Of course, it is also mentioned that Karna, that comes in that Karna movie by Shivaji. So it's very, for the Tamil-speaking audience here, I'm sure we remember this with Mr. Shivaji Ganeshan's acting. So they disable Karna thus. So Krishna is very categoric. He says, I will do my strategy to bring a definitive end. So all that he does the disabling of Karna. And if you remember, I told you a few minutes back that every conceivable code of conduct was possibly violated, except not killing women. And that's exactly what Krishna used. Now, Bhishma had a curse that he could be killed only by a woman. So he's also a very powerful warrior, the patriarch, the lifetime celibate, whose own actions actually stirred the Mahabharata itself in his youth. And so they position Shikandi, who's actually a reincarnation of somebody who's born to kill Bhishma. So the moment they go in, and Shikandi is half man, half woman. So they position, Krishna ensures that Shikandi is positioned before Bhishma, and Bhishma drops his weapons, and Bhishma is again, sort of beaten down. And then, of course, Bhishma is somebody who has got a boon that he can choose the time of his death. So, and then he's laid on a bed of arrows. There is water that comes from a spring, which comes from Arjuna's arrow. That's apparently called the Bhishma Kund. And then Bhishma chooses the time of his death, and he chooses to die in the Uttarayan, or the rising phase of the sun. And that's the story of Bhishma. And some of these are actually very, very poignant as well. And for some of us who've grown up on this morning schedule of Mahabharata, at an age when I didn't even realize half these stories, we used to watch them. The next was the sunset of Jayatratha. So these I thought make for just interesting evening stories. So as I had mentioned before, it's Drona who creates the Chakravyu on the 13th day. And Jayatratha very unfairly kills Abhimanyu, who's a lad of less than 18. Arjuna is crestfallen, and Arjuna says, I will kill Jayatratha before sunset. Otherwise, I will die. I will commit suicide. So Krishna is wondering, what to do with this? And I'm sort of battling with somebody who's half man and half baby, alternating. So the battle rages. Both of them are extremely powerful warriors, magical weapons, all the works. In fact, Arjuna inherits a bulk of his magical weapons from Drona. Again, it's often said of Drona that he was very unfair to Ekalavya, whom he and that was not expected of a guru. So this is to just go back on somebody who was not the correct mentor as well. So the battle is raging between Arjuna and Jayatratha. and it seems to be no end. So Krishna is sort of getting worried because the sun is about to set. He puts his discus out, the discus that Krishna carries, and he masks the sun such that only the Kaurava side tends to think. He creates a temporary eclipse. So Jayadratha is heaving the sigh of relief and saying, "Oh my God, great! The sun is, set." And then he drops his weapons, and then Jayadratha is vanquished. And how? Jayadratha, there is one more boon or curse or whatever. They say, on whosoever Jayadratha's head falls, that person will also die. So Jayadratha's head is sort of cut off in such a way that it goes and lands on his father's lap. And therein Jayadratha and one more very, very powerful warrior of the Kauravas gets decimated on the 14th day. So it was all about strategy, and the same thing about audit today. I mean, I wouldn't liken so much audit to a war. It's not. But I think today, with a lot of things that are going on around us, especially, I don't know whether I mentioned this before, today your entire audit is not about solvency. Until ILFS happened, audit was all about solvency. Today, suddenly, audit has become all about liquidity. With all the disclosure, and that I think is a very dramatic and decisive change that I'm seeing in this profession. And born out of all the successive failures. See, there's really no law in the universe that's proactive. All laws are reactive. Satyam went wrong, Sahara went wrong, Sharda went wrong, we got New Companies Act. ILFS went wrong, we're now getting, the new CARO, the new Schedule 3. IBC, a lot of failures came up, again moved out. So I think the relevance of strategy is sort of very universal, even in our day-to-day lives.
Thank you, Priya. Actually, when you're mentioning about strategy, I have also understood strategies will have to be good. And even in Mahabharata, to cite examples from Mahabharata itself, the Kauravas, army was led for the first 10 days by Bhishma. When Bhishma fell, the next 5 days, it was Drona who led the army. And after Drona fell, it was Ashwatthama who led the army for 2 days. Karna who led the army for 2 days. And finally, when Karna also fell, it was on the last day Ashwatthama, led the army. But here, the strategy of Bhishma was he insulted Karna so much that Karna at one point of time says, "I will not fight in this war as long as Bhishma is alive. As long as Bhishma leads the war, I will not work under him. I will not, fight under him," because that was a strategy adopted by Bhishma himself, because he knew that there are only two people who can take on Arjuna. One is Bhishma and another is, Karna. So he wanted to be sure that Karna is alive till the last day of the war to ensure, the killing of Arjuna. And that is the reason why he even insulted. That was a strategy that was adopted by, Bhishma. Again, good strategies become good practices. Good practices become good standards. So when we are talking about auditing standards and all that, I think overall our seniors or the elders in the profession have adopted practices that were good strategies, and probably that they have morphed into standards today. And to that extent, I think there is a definite connect between strategy adopted by several people, even from the Mahabharata times, and to the strategy adopted by our own seniors in the profession. Next is what you're going to be talking about, integrity. Oh,
yeah. So just before that, maybe one attribute that we really didn't think of when we made these slides was teamwork. So what's very interesting is Pandavas, though 5, they're a very integrated team. Now you just spoke about the insult of Karna. Very similar to this is Karna, when he goes to the battle, the main day, he asks for the most skilled charioteer. The charioteer is called Shalya. Now, Shalya himself was supposed to be Yudhishthira's man. But what happens is when Shalya is bringing his team to join Yudhishthira, Duryodhana takes him and entertains him so well. And Shalya doesn't know who his host is. So he gives a boon to Duryodhana, thinking that Duryodhana's side is only the Yudhishthira side. And so then Duryodhana uses the opportunity and makes a very unwilling Shalya to fight for him. So they were never a cohesive team. Now there was a Shalya who was standing out. There was a Karna who was prevented from killing his brothers in some sense. He says, I will not kill anybody other than Arjuna. So I can kill anybody else. I won't kill anybody else. Similarly, Bhishma always had a soft corner for the Pandavas because they were also, his own clan. Similarly, Drona had a soft corner for Arjuna. So they were a very, sort of, like the minions. They were all eclectic and they were not a unified team. So that's another thing. Even if you're a very small organization, if you are a very cohesive team, I think you can do a better job than if you're an army of 100, but not really working cohesively with each other. And this is all the more relevant when you have these joint audits. Your auditors need to work in tandem with each other and not against each other. And at some level, I would think that this teamwork is a eulogy that can be extended to even a client and the auditor. It's not that you're fighting each other, you're fighting for the same cause of presenting a good financial statement. So I think it calls for teamwork at all levels, something that we didn't quite cover, but I thought I should speak about. Yeah.
Sipriya, when you're talking about teamwork, I remembered when you asked me to get a chief guest for one of the ladies' day, women chartered accountants day. I think I brought Nityasri Mahadevan once. And at that point of time, she had a mention, and she brought some reference to the comparison between the chartered accountancy course and the music field. She said both fields have what is called something in common. One is Siksha and another is teamwork. Both of us working with numbers, she said. So I remember she was also talking about teamwork when as a comparative situation. So that's what I just thought I would remember. Next, we'll go to the integrity aspect of it.
Yes, sir. What is the next story, sir, after integrity? Okay, that's the last one. So I think we left out one, which is actually
reporting. You have missed. Reporting is skipped.
So reporting. So who's reporting the war to Dhritarashtra? It's Sanjaya. So Sanjaya is supposed to be bestowed with this very unique vision of being able to see long distances. I mean, the earliest instances of your Zoom or your WebEx in the Mahabharata, and it's so true. What we started with, whatever is not there in the Mahabharata is nowhere else, and what's there can be found everywhere else. You've got immaculate conception. For example, the artificial insemination. Very own Drona is derived from a word Drun. So he's supposed to have been born that way. The Pancha Pandavas were born of an immaculate conception. There was true and fair reporting. Now, it was very difficult for Sanjaya. It was not easy. There's Dhritarashtra, who's really tense, a very, very powerful king. And yet, Sanjaya reported facts fearlessly as they were. And it's supposed to be the world's, I mean, at least whatever I could think of, the ability to maintain his calm and describe events and situations exactly as how they were, rather than not how they ought to be. So that's Sanjaya for you for true and fair reporting.
Yeah, true. What you say is absolutely true. Not only true and fair. But in audit report drafting, we are often faced with situations as to how to report a few things. And discretion should be used judiciously. What to write and how to write. How much truth is necessary. How much fairness is warranted. Whether it is a clean report or a qualified report, or an adverse report or a disclaimer of opinion. Emphasis of matter or simply a mention in the notes and accounts. What is to be done? And what is about fair? All is love. All is fair in love and war and in audit. The term fair itself has a tinge of unfairness, because fairness is always decided by circumstances. Or the victims or beneficiaries, as the case may be. In many situations, we have to be truly fair and fairly true. That's all. So it is like, being like a Vidura of Mahabharata. Not exactly like Sanjaya. Sanjaya was only a reporter. He was a expert commentator. No, not even an expert commentator. He was a commentator. That's all. He just reported what exactly was happening in the battlefield to Dhritarashtra. Nothing more than that. But when you're talking about true and fair reporting or true and fair uh, I mean, mentioning of situations, I think probably we will bring Vidura on to the fore. Anyway, we'll go to the, when you go to the professional integrity or the auditor's integrity, I think you will have more to talk about on Vidura also.
So just on this professional integrity, sir, I'm sure people who have heard me before have heard this story, but this was actually a story I picked up from the Society of Auditors, one of the events, and it was told by Mr. C.L. Ramakrishnan, an IPS officer of, in fact, I should not be speaking on this topic, sir. We should have called him, it just struck me. And ever since I heard this story, I've never stopped mentioning this in any forum. This is not a story from the Rig Veda. This is not a story from the Mahabharata, but it's supposed to be a very old story from the Rig Veda. So these were the Vedic times, and there were only two sets of people, if you could call them people, in the world. One was the Devas and the other was the Asuras. And every day, the Devas and the Asuras would fight. The fixtures would get announced in the morning. And this particular Monday through Saturday, they'd fight, and Sunday was the break day. This particular Monday, it was Shiva versus the Asuras. And Shiva was, of course, formidable. So, but Indra, who's also a god, was very unhappy with Shiva's growing popularity. So apparently he calls a termite. And he says, hey, termite, you must help me to defeat Shiva. So the termite says, oh my God, first of all, Indra, you're so big, you're so powerful. Why are you calling me? I'm just a small, meek animal. And secondly, he says, I have an even more interesting question. Aren't you guys on the same side? Is this not match fixing? So Indra sort of, waves his hand and says, tell me, can you do it or not? So the termite says, okay, you want my help to defeat Shiva, but tell me, how should I do it? He says, very simple. When Shiva is stringing his bow, just go bite off the string. And then what happens? The string goes plonk, and Shiva can't fire his arrows, and Shiva will at least lose this battle. So the termite actually says, okay, let me think about it. And then the termite comes back and apparently asks Indra in Sanskrit, Ka Dakshina, which means I will do this, but what will you pay me? To which Indra responds and says, until there is wood and water on this earth, you will be there. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is supposed to be the story of evolution of corruption. So the moral being, until there is wood and water on this earth, there will be corruption. And because we are a civil society and we need to be governed, there will always be this auditing profession. Every time somebody tells me, you'll have artificial intelligence and you'll replace an auditor, I think it's impossible. Nothing can substitute human intuition, because as systems evolve, we learn to game them even better. So this is, and so what's the moral of the story is that, right through our CA Inter final days, you're always, spoken about this professional ethics. So when I speak about integrity, it's a very superior term. Again, this is exactly from Mr. Ramakrishnan's lecture. I can't forget this. He says, honesty is a state of speaking the truth, whereas integrity is one level higher. It's derived from the Latin word integra, which means integration of your mind, what you think, what you speak, and how you act. And I think that's what is sort of expected out of this fraternity. See, again, in my opinion, I think we are 98% there. It's a 2% issue. It's a 2% issue driven by perception, driven by our own challenges that we need to, overcome. But this is my take on integrity, and this is my story on why we need to, be there, because corruption is going to be there all the time until there's wood and water. And very interestingly, just like to wrap it up with a very small, another anecdote. So this is where we again started with the Yatho Dharmos Tato Jayaha. So if you look at our national emblem, it says Satyameva Jayate, which is truth alone triumphs. So if you look at the High Court emblem also, it will say Satyameva Jayate. But look at the Supreme Court emblem. It says Yato Dharmos Tato Jayaha. So in some sense, I think the Supreme Court is the custodian of all justice of this land. And I think that's exactly where we also ought to be. And I'd like to conclude it with the story of Yato Dharmos Tato Jayaha. As I had mentioned, it comes many, many times in the Mahabharata. But the last time it is said by Gandhari. So apparently, people come and report the defeat of the Kauravas to Gandhari. And Gandhari says, I knew this all the time. Why did I know all this all the time? Is because she says, uh, Yatho Krishna Tato Dharma and Yatho Dharmos Tato Jayaha. Wherever there is Krishna, there will be Dharma, and wherever there is Dharma, there will be victory. And with this last story, I'd like to wrap up my part of it, and I think we're pretty much on time. And I must say that I've felt overwhelmingly nice in this session, and I'm very, very thankful to you for this opportunity, and I've never felt better in my life. And thank you so much to Mr. Prabhakar for
Thank you, Priya.
the amazing difference you made. Thanks.
Thank you. On the the last one on the professional integrity that you mentioned, I have a small point to add. The integrity, the whole thing also has evolved so much that we are talking about integrity today, and there are inbuilt checks to ensure that there are integrity. For example, there is something called the concept of conflict of interest. If I have a son my son I know is an MD of a company, I'm not supposed to be the auditor for that company. There is conflict of interest. Even though you can call yourself an embodiment of integrity, it is still statutorily your integrity is ensured by bringing what is called the conflict of interest. For example, during a particular conversation, Vidura tells Yudhishthira a small story about Prahalada's son called Virochana, who is in competition with another guy called Suthanva to marry a lady, very pretty lady called Kesini. Both of them want to get married, and Kesini, it says, I will get married to the better of you. But how to decide who is a better between Suthanva and Virochana? Suthanva himself says, let us go to your father. Because he knows, in spite of the fact that Prahalada is the father of Virochana, he will still be extremely just and fair. And at that point of time, Prahalada is, all of us know Prahalada. He's very confused. He says, on the one hand, I have my son, whom I love, who is the world to me. And on the other hand, I have another man who is definitely better qualified. What do I decide? He actually goes and asks a Hamsa, and he says, yes, the world is very big, and your son is your world. And even for the exchange of a word, you must not speak a lie. At that point of time, Prahalada says, no, I will only vote in favor of Suthanva, even disappointing his own son. To that extent, integrity was there, but that was in much before Dwapara Yuga. We are in Kali Yuga. Okay, I don't think the concept of integrity also has got its own checks and balances. So thank you very much, Sripriya. It was a wonderful session. You made the day for the Society of Auditors. When we originally thought that we will have a session like this, we never imagined that it will go so interesting. I'm sure those people who are not here today have really missed a good treat. Sripriya, wow, it's a wow, Sripriya.
I think you made a big difference too. So
thank you.
Thank you. A lot of compliments. There is no query from any of the members. If anybody want to talk, you can unmute yourself and speak.
yes, sir.
Excellent session, Sripriya. Only compliments is coming in the chat box.
If
If you want to
anyone
speak,
has
you can
any
raise your
story,
hand. We
they
can
add
unmute you.
some.
Pardon?
If anybody has a story, they can add.
Yeah. So we have another 5 minutes to go, or no one has raised the hand. So we have an announcement to make, Sripriya, before we conclude formally. We are organizing a masterclass program on exercise and succession planning from 21st to 23rd of this month. It will be from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. It is structured in a beautiful way by Kaitan and Company. It is a paid program, so we will be sharing the details to all the members, and it will be posted in our website also. So those interested can attend the session and get themselves benefited. Raj, anything you want to add?
So somebody wanted to unmute. Rohit wants to unmute.
I'll do it. Rohit, now you can do.
Yeah, I just want to add one story. So with respect to competency, so I remember still that even after the war, when Krishna was discussing with Karna before Karna's death, so he says throughout the life, you have been trying to compete with Arjuna. You never tried to improve yourself. That is one thing which our profession also needs to understand, that we should never let others down. It is something which we need to improve ourselves. We should be better by day. So we have to be one step ahead of where we were yesterday. So that is one thing which I would like to add.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's what Krishna says when he says Uddare Tatmanatmanam. Maybe Prabhakar sir would know this better.
That is, one has to always think high of himself. One should never demean himself, because one is one's own friend and one is one's own enemy. That's what Bhagavad Gita, in Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita chapter 6 says.
Yeah, and one more thing I would like to add in is when we are discussing about the things like audit of the rules and consistency, ethics, code of conduct, everything. So before the war was started, when the rules were framed, so Sahadev asked Yudhishthir, so when it comes to dharma, will we still get locked, or will we abide by the rules of dharma and all? Then Yudhishthir answers that dharma is something which will never let you lock. Instead, it will give you freedom. So he says a classic example that, for example, take the example of a copper, where sometimes it changes its color from white and sometimes it's green. So it is not consistent. But when it comes to gold, it is consistent. That's why it's more valuable. So you have to be always consistent, follow by the rules, and give a true and fair view. So that was another story of consistency and code of ethics, everything.
Very nice, Rohit. Very nice.
Thank you, Rohit.
I think we can close, Rajagopal.
Yeah.
Thank you, organizers, for the excellent program. Prabhakar, Sripriya, kudos to you, both of you. Excellent.
Thank you, Bhaskar sir. Thank you.
Hi, Ramsamy, long time since I saw you.
Yeah. Fine.
Bye. Thanks, Prabhakar, again.
Thank you, Bhaskar.
Okay.
See you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, GNR sir, and thank you, Rajgopalan sir, especially. So, thanks.
Thank you, Sripriya. It's an excellent program. We have to thank you for accepting our invitation at a short notice, and you are kind enough to, in fact, of a busy schedule. You are.
Also, thank her for tolerating my intrusions.
Yeah. No, sir. You supplemented our presentation also in a beautiful way.
It's like a dialogue between both of you.
It's more of an interview. So thank you, Sripriya. In fact, you explained the auditing issues connected well with Mahabharata's story. It's a great learning for us. So we have to read the Mahabharata once again to understand these intricacies. Thank you very much. Thank you all the participants for joining on a weekday. Thank you very much. Raj?
That's it. That's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.